The silence of the imperial Rasoikhana, the royal kitchen, was an illusion. Beneath the opulent dome, where the air was thick with the ghost scents of saffron and roasted meat, the real noise was in the meticulous choreography of 150 cooks, scullions, and water carriers. They moved with the precision of a jeweled clock, each hand knowing its place in the immense machinery dedicated to the appetite of one man, Emperor Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah. In the dead center of this empire of cuisine stood Mir Qasim, the Shakabdar, the royal taster. Qasim was not a cook nor a courtier. He was a sentinel of the most vulnerable and vital part of the realm, the emperor's throat. His uniform was simple, a clean white cotton jama and pajama, a stark contrast to the silken robes and brocades of the court. His only adornment was the heavy, unspoken burden of his duty. He was 28, lean from a life of discipline, with eyes the color of dark honey that missed nothing. He had tasted 7,300 meals in the emperor's service, an invisible record of survival. Today's meal, a late afternoon dasturkhan, was modest for the great Mughal. A rich pulao of spiced lamb, a tart achar of mangoes, and the delicate korma of quail in cream. The process began. The head chef, a nervous man named Firoz, whose career hung on Qasim's next few minutes, presented the pulao. It was a mountain of fragrant rice, perfectly steamed. The serving platter, Qasim noted, was the standard issue porcelain, not the emperor's personal emerald-studded plate. "The seal, Firoz." Qasim's voice was low, cutting through the kitchen's hum. Firoz, his hands trembling slightly, pointed to the wax seal on the silver chain securing the lid. It bore the imperial crest, the lion and the sun, intact. The dish had not been opened since its final preparation. A small, almost imperceptible knot of tension eased in Qasim's chest. The easiest poisons to detect were the ones administered in haste. He broke the seal. The aroma of cardamom, cinnamon, and aged basmati rose like a fragrant cloud. Qasim couldn't use a silver knife or a peacock feather, the theatrical props of lesser kingdoms. He used his palate and his knowledge. He knew the 200 natural poisons listed in the royal scrolls. He knew the 50 known antivenoms, and he knew the emperor's body better than the royal physician. For he was tasked not to cure sickness, but to prevent its source. He took a small spoonful of the pulao. The grain was firm, the lamb tender. It tasted of earth and heat, of the wealth of the Mughal plains. He chewed slowly. First, the taste. Was there a metallic tang, an overly sweet counterflavor, a bitterness hidden deep beneath the spice? Nothing. Second, the texture. Was there grit, a subtle, viscous slipperiness that indicated a crushed powder? The dish was flawless. Third, the delay. This was the most dangerous part. Poisons like Visham could take minutes to manifest, beginning with a tingling on the tongue, a sudden chill, or a wave of vertigo. Qasim stood utterly still for 60 seconds, the weight of the empire pressing down on his temples. The hundreds of people in the kitchen held their breath. In the silence, only the sound of a nearby fountain in the marble courtyard was audible. 60 seconds passed. The familiar mild burning of chili was all he felt. "Clean," he declared, placing the empty spoon down. He repeated the ritual for the mango achar, sour, spicy, and safe. Then for the korma of quail. Each dish was an interrogation, a test of his life against the emperor's. It was while sampling the korma, a thick, ivory-colored gravy that he noticed the aberration. It was microscopic, a fleeting sensation he hadn't experienced in years. A fleeting, high-pitched prickle on the underside of his tongue, not bitterness, but a sharp, clean sensation, like a single grain of sand had been dissolved in the cream. It vanished almost instantly, masked by the richness of the quail. No taste, no smell, no metallic hint, but the prickle. Qasim finished the small portion, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He stepped away from the serving table, wiping his lips with a clean cloth. "The dishes are cleared for presentation," he announced to Feroz, his head chef visibly slumped with relief. But Qasim's mind was racing. The prickle. It was the calling card of Shauk-i-Jan, the wish of the soul, a poison derived from a rare South Indian root. It was odorless, colorless, and caused only a momentary, sharp prickle on contact with saliva. Its true mechanism was slow. Administered in a single dose, it caused a gentle, progressive failure of the nervous system over a period of weeks, culminating in what appeared to be a natural, peaceful death, a stroke, or a wasting fever. It was undetectable by common medical observation. It left no trace in the body. The dose was minuscule, enough to cause the prickle, but perhaps not enough to be lethal to a man of the emperor's size, or enough to be lethal but spread across several meals to ensure a very slow, very quiet demise. Qasim felt the sudden crushing realization of the weight he carried. He was standing in the very heart of the conspiracy. The poison had passed his lips. The poison was headed to the emperor's table. His choices, stark and terrifying, flashed before him. Stop the meal. He could sound the alarm, shatter the tranquility of the kitchen, and accuse the head chef. But without a physical trace of poison, without the immediate signs of affliction, the accusation would be seen as a desperate, treasonous lie. Feroz would deny it. Qasim would be stripped, tortured, and executed for sedition. The poisoner would walk free, and the emperor would remain unguarded. Allow the meal. He could say nothing. Allow the korma to be served, and watch his emperor die a slow, agonizing death over the next few weeks. He would remain in his post, a trusted, loyal servant, a silent murderer. The third way, the most dangerous, to remove the threat without exposing the conspiracy. Qasim looked at the large bowl of the creamy korma. It was already sealed for transport to the private dining chamber. Feroz gave a signal, and 4 guards lifted the tray. "Wait," he said, his voice just loud enough to halt the procession. Feroz turned, his brow furrowed. "Taster, is there an issue?" Qasim approached the tray, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had only more than 30 seconds. He leaned close to the head chef. "Feroz," he murmured, his eyes locked on the korma bowl. "I forgot to confirm the garnishing on the pulao. The emperor detests over-roasted almonds. You know this." Feroz blinked, thrown off balance by the minor infraction. "But, taster, it is the korma that must be moved. The pulao can be checked."
"I checked the pulao first," Qasim insisted, placing his hand firmly on the sealed korma bowl, his fingers brushing the cool silver. His other hand went to the small, ornate atardan, perfume box, tucked into his sash, not for perfume, but for his personal, highly concentrated antitoxin, a blend he had brewed himself over years. As Feroz turned toward the pulao to check the almonds, Qasim swiftly lifted the korma lid an inch, just enough to expose the surface. In a blur, he poured a mere 3 drops of the thick, oily antitoxin into the rich cream. It was a gamble. The antitoxin would bind to and neutralize the minute amount of Shauk-i-Jan that was present. but it also had a mild, distinct flavor, a subtle, bitter note of wild mint. If the emperor detected it, Qasim's life was forfeit. He had adulterated the imperial food. He snapped the lid back down and stepped away, his face pale beneath his dark skin. The almonds are acceptable, Feroz. Carry on. The tray moved. The silent column of guards left the rasoi khana. Qasim was alone. Surrounded by the bustling energy of the kitchen, he no longer saw. The tiny, bitter ghost of mint was still on his fingers. He had saved the emperor, for now. But he had not saved himself. He had tasted the poison, and the slow, insidious agent was now in his blood. He had bought the emperor's days, perhaps weeks of life, and for himself a death sentence he could not avoid, and a conspiracy he had to unmask before the symptoms began to show. The king's poisoner had been poisoned, and the true game had just begun. The marble floor of the rasoi khana suddenly felt too cold beneath Qasim's thin leather khusa sandals. The scent of the royal meal, the saffron, the spice, the cream, now tasted like ash on his tongue, a mocking reminder of the small dose of poison coursing through his own veins. The shokejan was slow, but it was relentless. It gave him days, perhaps a few short weeks to find the source. This was the true price of his loyalty. He had traded the emperor's immediate, certain death for his own drawn-out sentence, all to buy the time necessary to protect the throne. He had to act. Secrecy was his antivenom. Qasim left the kitchen, passing through the inner courtyards. The afternoon sun, filtered by the intricate sandstone lattice of the palace, dappled the ground in geometric patterns, beautiful and unforgiving. He sought out the one man in the sprawling red fort who had the intelligence and the discretion to be his shadow. Sheikh Badr, his second in command, the junior Shakabdar. He found Badr in the Sharbat Khana, the cooling chamber where royal drinks were prepared. Badr was a man of contrasts, immense raw strength hidden beneath a gentle demeanor, his face scarred by a childhood fever making him look perpetually stern. Badr, Qasim said, his voice flat. Dismiss the other men. There is a new preparation required. Badr, without question, cleared the room. He knew Qasim's tone. It was the low, steady sound of deep trouble. Qasim did not waste time. He moved to the shelf of clay water pitchers, his back to the door, giving Badr only a profile. Badr, listen closely and do not interrupt me, Qasim began, his words rapid, precise, and entirely in the obscure Turkic dialect they used for utmost privacy. The food was tainted, the pulao, a very small dose of shokejan. Badr's breath hitched, his scarred face paling. He knew the properties of the wish of the soul, the whisper-thin poison of the south. Who tasted it, Aga? Badr whispered, using the honorific for master. Qasim picked up a small brass ladle, inspecting it. I did. He turned and let Badr see his eyes. And only I. There will be no visible symptoms for days. When they begin, they will be subtle. A tremor in the hand, difficulty breathing. Badr looked horrified. Then we must call the Hakim, the physician. We must... Silence, Qasim snapped, a rare burst of fire. You will not call anyone. To reveal my affliction is to reveal a successful attempt on the emperor's life. That is sedition, Badr. The conspirators will scatter like dust, and my death will be pointless. We have perhaps 2 weeks. The emperor must remain unaware, and the palace must believe I am perfectly healthy. Badr straightened, the gravity of the situation settling upon him. He understood that their loyalty was now a weapon, and its edge was the lie they had to live. What is the assignment, Aga? Badr asked, his voice steady now. The poison came from the rasoi khana. It means the poisoner is either a cook or a high-ranking courtier with kitchen access, or the source is an item that only high-ranking cooks would handle. He pointed to a stack of copper spice tins. Focus on the source of the cream and the quail. These are special items, delivered separately from the general stores. They come from the Royal Pesh Khana, the provisioning office. Qasim gave his orders. The supply chain. Badr was to immediately go to the Pesh Khana, not to investigate, but to complain bitterly about the quality of the quail and cream. He must demand to know the exact source, the name of the supplier, and the delivery route. He must do this with enough arrogance to be annoying, but not enough to seem suspicious. The head chef. Badr was to observe Firoz, the head chef, over the next few days. Watch his hands, Badr. Does he twitch? Does he speak to anyone he shouldn't? Does he seem relieved that the meal passed or disappointed? The neutralization. Qasim produced the tiny vial of his antitoxin, now nearly empty. I used the last of this to neutralize the poison in the emperor's meal. I need the ingredients to make more. Not for me, it's too late for a cure, but to protect him if another attempt is made. He listed the rare ingredients: lion's blood root, crystallized mercury, and the dew from a specific mountain orchid. The first two are illegal. You must acquire them silently through my old contacts in the opium dens of the city bazaar. Pay any price. Badr's massive hands shook as he took the list. And you, Aga? Qasim looked toward the distant, hidden chambers where the emperor now dined. I will do what I always do. I will remain on duty. I will taste the food. I will be the loyal servant. And I will look closer at the men who stand closest to the throne.
He clasped Badr's shoulder, a fleeting moment of connection. Go. My life is forfeit. Now the emperor's rests entirely on yours. Badr nodded once, a promise darker than any oath. He was gone, melting into the shadows of the immense palace, beginning his deadly, impossible task. Qasim returned to his post. The mild tremor in his left hand, the first subtle symptom, was still absent, but he knew it was coming. He walked to the window, staring out at the capital of the Mughal Empire. The sprawling city of Agra was a maze of power, and somewhere within it, a viper waited. The poisoner is among us, Qasim thought, and he believes he has won. Mir Qasim knew the Mughal court was a hothouse of ambition, where every smile hid a dagger and every gift concealed a debt. With his own clock ticking, he had to look beyond the obvious target, the head chef, Firoz, and scrutinize the men who stood to gain from the emperor's death. The following morning, Qasim performed his duty with a chilling sense of duality. He moved through the court, a loyal shadow, tasting the emperor's morning tea, his eyes darting to the three most powerful figures seated near the throne. Mirza Kamran, the emperor's vizier, chief minister. Kamran was old, cunning, and fiercely conservative. He had served the dynasty for 40 decades, his influence so deep it was almost part of the foundation of the empire. He favored the emperor's younger brother, Prince Daoud, a pliable man who would allow the vizier to rule from the shadows. Kamran's power was absolute, but his time was short. He needed a quick transition of power while his faculties remained sharp. Raja Veer Singh, the Mir Bakshi, military commander. A Rajput general, he was outwardly loyal but inwardly resentful of the emperor's recent peace treaty with the Deccan sultanates, which he saw as a weakness. Veer Singh commanded the loyalty of the army. If the emperor died, the ensuing chaos would allow him to consolidate military power and perhaps even carve out a semi-autonomous region for his clan. He was a man of action, not subtle poisoning, but his physician, Hakim Luqman, had once studied in the south, where Shauq-e-Jahan was known. Nur Jahan, the Empress Dowager, the emperor's late father's favorite wife. Now relegated to the status of a revered elder, Nur Jahan hated the current emperor, believing he had stolen the throne from her own blood relative years ago. Her chambers were rumored to be centers of whispered conspiracies. Her weapon was not force, but influence and whispers. She was the most likely to have the means and motive for a slow, quiet murder that would appear as a natural ailment. Qasim decided to pursue the Empress Dowager first. He needed information about the poison's origin, and she held the court's oldest secrets. His chance came that evening during the emperor's private majlis, a small gathering of only the highest officials. While the emperor spoke of trade routes, Qasim watched the delivery of the evening's only sweet, a bowl of crushed pistachio and rosewater halwa. The emperor offered a spoonful of the halwa to Nur Jahan as a gesture of respect. She accepted, but as she brought the spoon to her lips, she paused, her ancient eyes fixing on Qasim. She knew something was wrong. Qasim kept his face passive, waiting for her move. Nur Jahan did not eat the halwa. Instead, she smiled, a thin, paper-dry expression. "The years have chilled my appetite, Your Majesty," she said, her voice a low, cultured purr. "But I confess, my old physician, Hakim Adil, spoke of a weakness for such sweets. He would often speak of the healing properties of the specific pistachio grown only in the hills of Bijapur." Her words were a challenge, veiled in courtly conversation. Bijapur was one of the Deccan sultanates, the region the emperor had recently sought peace with, and where the poison Shah-e-Jahan was sourced. The emperor, oblivious, merely nodded. "A fine place, Bijapur, a beautiful land." But Qasim heard the message loud and clear. "The poison is from Bijapur. I know about it, and I know you know." As the majlis concluded, Qasim moved quickly, intercepting Nur Jahan's personal female bodyguard, a giant Afghan woman named Malika, just as they were leaving. "Wait, Malika," Qasim said, his voice low and urgent. "The Empress Dowager has dropped her surma box, her antimony coal." Malika hesitated, her hand instinctively going to her waist. Nur Jahan never misplaced anything. "Here," Qasim said, holding up a small empty silver box, not the Empress's, but one he had palmed. "I found it near the Persian carpet." Nur Jahan stopped, turning back. Her eyes narrowed. "Thank you, Shakabdar. Your sight is sharper than mine." She approached him, and for a moment they stood close enough for their breaths to mingle, the ultimate breach of court etiquette. "I have a simple curiosity, Shakabdar. Tell me, the taste you search, is it bitter or merely clean?" Qasim's heart hammered. She was confirming his fear, probing his knowledge of the Shah-e-Jahan. "Excellency," Qasim replied, matching her whisper, his eyes steady on hers. "The taste I seek is the taste of betrayal. It begins clean, but it always ends with the bitter flavor of a ruler's blood." Nur Jahan allowed a rare, genuine smile to curve her lips, a look of profound, cold approval. "Then, Shakabdar, you are looking in the wrong room. The serpent's egg is never laid at the heart of the nest. It is placed just outside, where the parent believes it to be a harmless stone." She stepped back, turning to Malika. "Come, my guard. My quarters are chilly tonight." As Qasim watched them depart, he understood. Nur Jahan was not the poisoner. She was too subtle, too old school. But she was a brilliant schemer who knew exactly who was. She had just given him the next critical clue. The serpent's egg is never laid at the heart of the nest. The poison was not administered by a core member of the inner court, the nest. It was placed just outside, by someone who had peripheral but critical access to the emperor's food, likely from the provisioning chain, the peshkhana that Badr was investigating. The link was clear. Bijapur, the south, the supply route, and the cream and quail that were tainted. Qasim felt the subtle, terrifying first sign of the poison. It was not a tremor, but a sharp, needle-like pressure behind his left eye, like a tiny screw tightening in his skull. He fought the urge to rub it. 2 weeks, reduced to maybe 10 days, he thought. He had to reach Badr, and quickly.
The pressure behind Qasim's eye persisted, a grinding reminder of the Shaki-Jan. He knew the poison was subtly interfering with the nerves of sight and motor control. He had perhaps a week left before the tremors began, and his cover was irrevocably blown. His greatest fear was not death, but failing to protect the Emperor. To prevent detection, he had taken to rinsing his mouth meticulously with a strong herbal wash before and after every meal he tasted for the Emperor, a practice he explained away as a new personal cleansing ritual. He needed butter. Qasim spent the next day waiting, the routine of the palace feeling like a gilded cage. He supervised the preparation of the midday meal, tasted the dal, the sabzi, and the roti, confirming everything was clean. The head chef, Firoz, was jumpy, but Qasim observed no signs of the cold disappointment he'd been told to look for. Firoz was merely a scared, highly paid servant, not a mastermind. That evening, a runner from the barracks brought a folded piece of coarse, unstamped cloth to Qasim's private chamber, a signal from Badr. Qasim unrolled the cloth. Scrawled in charcoal in the familiar blocky hand of his second-in-command was a single message. The lion is found. Bazaar, midnight, the old weaver's den. Qasim dressed in the simple, dark clothing of a merchant, covering his recognizable features with a voluminous scarf. He was abandoning his post, a capital offense, but the need for secrecy was paramount. The palace was too full of watching eyes and listening walls. He scaled the inner walls of the fort using a hidden maintenance route known only to a few, descending into the noisy, suffocating anonymity of Agra's old city, the bazaar. The air of the marketplace was a riot of smells: cooking fires, sweet opium smoke, unwashed crowds, and stale flower garlands. Qasim moved like a ghost through the labyrinthine alleys, his senses tuned to the low thrum of the city's underbelly. He located the old weaver's den, a dilapidated shop known for its low-grade textiles and high-grade secrets. Butler was waiting inside, sitting among stacks of moth-eaten carpets, the massive man looking like a mountain in the small dark room. "Aga," Butler murmured, rising. "Report," Qasim commanded, pulling down his scarf. He felt a throbbing pulse behind his eye, but forced himself to ignore it. Badr handed him a small sealed clay pot, the antitoxin. "I paid dearly for the lion's blood root and the crystallized mercury. The cost alone confirms your suspicion. The conspirators are men of boundless wealth." "Good," Qasim said, tucking the vital pot away. "Now the supply chain. I went to the peshkhana. I played the arrogant taster, demanding to know the source of the quail and the cream. The clerk eventually broke and gave me the name of the supplier, Rai Chand. He is a small-time provisioner, recently elevated to the Emperor's service only 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, Qasim repeated. The perfect time to establish trust. Rai Chand does not deal directly with the cooks. He sends his runner, a young boy, to deliver his goods to the kitchen receiving depot. But here is the serpent's egg, Aga, the clue the Empress Dowager gave you. Badr pulled out a ledger page, a copy he had bribed a clerk for. Rai Chand's main business is trading in exotic goods from the south. His most recent manifest shows a significant shipment of specialty spice from Bijapur, the very region the Empress mentioned. It arrived 2 weeks ago, the same week the korma was prepared. The pieces locked together with a cold, terrifying click. Rai Chand was the provisioner, linked to Bijapur, the source of the Shaki-Jan. He had the access and the method for a subtle, external poisoning. He was the harmless stone placed just outside the nest.
Raichand is the conduit, not the source, Qasim determined. He is either a desperate man bribed to poison or a disgruntled agent of one of the defeated southern sultans. We must seize him. It is already done, Aga. I could not risk revealing our hand to the palace guard. I tracked him from his warehouse tonight. I have him in a cellar beneath this very den, but he will not speak. Then we will make him speak, Qasim said, his hand resting on the hilt of his concealed knife. Aga, he is a small, soft man. He will be dead before he names his master, and we will lose the trail. We have to think of a better way. Qasim felt the fierce pressure behind his eye intensify. He needed to be surgical. The poisoner's identity was the only thing that could save the emperor and possibly save Qasim's legacy. He had to know who in the court had hired Raichand and why. We will not threaten his life, brother, Qasim said, a grim idea forming. We will threaten his profit. You will go back to Raichand. You will tell him that a powerful general knows he has embezzled a vast sum of money from the southern trade shipment. You will tell him that the general is coming for him now. His only chance is to name his true master, the person who ordered the poison, so we can offer them to the general as a counterbargain. It was a desperate gamble, exploiting the provisioner's fear of debt and the chaos of the court rather than the fear of death. Go, Qasim ordered. I will wait. We have less than a week before the king's taster begins to tremble. Badr nodded, his huge frame disappearing into the shadows of the bazaar. Qasim was alone again, the small clay pot of antitoxin warm in his hand, his head pounding with the first blinding certainty of the poison's victory. He just hoped his loyalty would outlast his body.
Qasim waited in the suffocating darkness of the weaver's den. The pulsing behind his eye was now a constant, rhythmic ache, and he had to clench his left hand to prevent a small, telltale tremor. The poison was accelerating. He leaned against the rough brick wall, focusing on the faint sounds of the city outside, the distant call of a night watchman, the gentle rattle of a carriage. A low scraping sound announced Badar's return. He was sweating, his large frame heaving from exertion. He carried nothing, but his eyes were grim. He spoke, Aga, Badar whispered, his voice thick with suppressed fury. Who? Qasim demanded, his own voice sounding thin and strained even to his ears. Raichand cracked like a stale rice cake. I told him the military commander, Veer Singh, was coming to execute him for the missing tax revenues from the Bijapur shipment. He was terrified of the general's men, more than he was of the poison's master. The name, Badar. Hurry. Badar spat on the floor, a gesture of profound disgust. The poisoner is Hakim Luqman, the royal physician. Qasim felt a cold shock that momentarily eclipsed the throbbing in his head. The physician, the man entrusted with the emperor's health, a courtier of immense trust and influence who had unfettered access to the royal person and knowledge of every subtle ailment. The physician, Qasim repeated, the name tasting like rust. Explain the connection. Luqman contacted Raichand 3 months ago. He paid him a fortune, enough to make Raichand feel safe for life, to handle all exotic shipments from Bijapur. The Hakim had smuggled the Shok-e-Jan root into the palace gardens under the guise of an exotic medicinal herb. He would then process the poison himself. But Raichand only supplied the cream and quail. How did the Hakim get the poison into those specific dishes? That is the cunning of it, Aga. Luqman is the physician. He is allowed into the Rasoi Khana every 3 days to inspect the hygiene of the water and the dairy products, a long-standing royal decree. He never touched the spices or the meat, which are guarded by us.
but he could easily smear a minute amount of the poison onto the inner rim of the cream pot before it was sealed, or onto the parchment wrapping the quail. The venom had been delivered not by a cook or a supplier, but by the trusted guardian of health, using his privileged access as a cloak. He was the serpent's egg dressed as a harmless healer. Qasim ran a trembling hand across his chin. Luqman has served the emperor for 20 years. Why now? Who does he serve? Raichan does not know the true master, but Luqman is known to be the closest confidant of Vizier Kamran, the emperor's chief minister. The truth solidified. Kamran was old and ambitious, wishing to secure his power by placing the pliable Prince Daoud on the throne. Luqman, the physician, was his most lethal weapon, the man who could guarantee a natural, untraceable death, ensuring a smooth transition of power. The time for subtlety is over, Qasim decided, pushing himself off the wall. The action brought a wave of dizziness, and his left hand finally betrayed him, the fingers curling in a faint, undeniable spasm. The emperor receives his morning cordial in 2 hours. That is when Luqman attends him for the daily health check. Luqman must be exposed before he can administer a fatal final dose. "How, Aga?" Badar asked, his tone urgent. "We have no proof, no poison, only the word of a black market peddler. If we accuse the royal physician, we are dead men." Qasim pulled out the small clay pot of antitoxin Badar had retrieved. "We expose him with his own methods," Qasim said, his mind racing. "Luqman knows I took a dose of the poison. He will be watching my health. He will be waiting for me to fail. We will use that anticipation against him." "The plan," Qasim laid out, his voice sharp with determination. "Preparation. Badar will use the lion's blood and mercury to create the antitoxin, not to cure, but to make a very specific antidote. He will also prepare a separate dose of a powerful, fast-acting herbal emetic, a substance that induces violent vomiting. The confrontation. Qasim will enter the chamber already appearing symptomatic. He would feign a crisis, a collapse brought on by the poison. The trap. Luqman will rush to save me to maintain his cover. He will administer an antidote to make me appear better, not kill me. That is when we strike. But Aga, if you collapse, he will try to cure you with the true poison, the one that kills instantly, to silence you," Badar argued, horrified. Qasim smiled faintly, a grim line on his face. "No, he will administer the fake antidote he keeps hidden, the one that merely masks the shock-e-Jan symptoms temporarily. He wants me silent, but not before the emperor sees the miracle cure provided by the loyal physician. That is his vanity." "But if he does give you the real poison?" "Then I drink the emetic, Badar," I interrupted. "The fast-acting poison will take seconds. The emetic will give me maybe a minute. It will be a race, but I will not die before I point my finger." "We will move together," Badar insisted. "No," Qasim said firmly. "You will be in the hall, concealed. When the confrontation begins, the only proof we will have is the contents of Luqman's hidden antidote. Your task is to seize his bag and flee to the safety of the kitchens. If I fall, you are the only one left to deliver the proof to the military commander and save the emperor." The plan was suicide, designed to expose the physician at the cost of the taster's life. Qasim stood tall, forcing the tremor in his hand to cease. The time bought by his loyalty was spent. "Go, Badar, prepare the drugs. Let us give the emperor one last clean meal."
The morning sun was a blade of light slicing across the polished marble floor of the Emperor's private receiving chamber. Emperor Jalaluddin sat on a low, ornate cushion, his expression one of weary patience. Vizier Kamran stood to his right, his eyes cold and assessing. Mir Qasim entered, a small, nearly empty vial of the fast-acting herbal emetic hidden in his palm. He had pushed his body to its breaking point. The pressure behind his left eye was now blinding, and the tremor in his left arm was a relentless vibration he could barely control. He looked exactly like a man in the final stages of a wasting illness. Hakim Luqman, the royal physician, entered last, carrying his leather medical bag, his face a perfect picture of concerned diligence. "My esteemed Hakim," the emperor said, stretching, "how is my digestion this morning? And where is my loyal Shagabdar? He is late." "Your Majesty, I fear my own digestion is quite troubled," Qasim rasped, taking 3 stumbling steps into the center of the room. He let his left hand fall to his side, allowing the tremor to be seen. The chamber went silent. The emperor looked up, alarmed. Luqman moved instantly, not to Qasim but to the emperor. "Your Majesty, I deeply regret to report that Qasim has been neglecting his prescribed tonics. He is displaying signs of a nervous affliction, likely a fever." Luqman's eyes gleamed with cold triumph. The taster was collapsing, exactly as planned. "Fever?" Qasim cried out, clutching his left arm, his voice breaking with genuine pain and feigned terror. "No, I am poisoned, Your Majesty. I tasted it days ago. The korma." The emperor's face flushed with shock, and Kamran leaned forward, his eyes burning into Qasim. "Treason!" the vizier roared. "Seize him! This man has lost his mind and seeks to sow discord." Luqman stepped toward Qasim, already handling his satchel. "Do not worry, Qasim. I can save you. You must submit to my care." This was the moment. Luqman would administer his false antidote, the one that temporarily masked the shock-e-jan symptoms, to make Qasim look stable, silencing his accusations and cementing Luqman's image as the savior, the loyal healer. "Traitor!" Qasim shrieked, not in fear but in anger, staggering closer to the Hakim. He lifted his trembling right hand, showing the Hakim the small, dark vial. "Shock-e-jan does not cause fever. It causes slow death, and I know you carry the quick remedy for my silence, physician." Qasim quickly uncorked the vial in his hand, bringing the small vessel to his lips. "Taste this, Luqman, a loyal servant's final offering." He swallowed the entire dose of the fast-acting herbal emetic. It burned like fire, and Qasim instantly felt his stomach revolt. Luqman, seeing the vial, panicked. He did not know what was in the vial, perhaps Qasim's own rapid counterpoison. Luqman lunged, not to treat, but to silence Qasim permanently before he could speak another word, or worse, regurgitate the poison as evidence. "Fool!" Luqman hissed, his mask finally breaking. He yanked a tiny pearl-handled silver needle from his satchel, one designed to administer a single fatal prick that would look like a sudden seizure. Qasim was already collapsing from the emetic's violent effect, but as he fell, he grabbed the handle of Luqman's medical bag with his left hand, holding fast. "Vizier Kamran, the physician, the Bijapur poison, he serves the vizier," Qasim choked out, his body heaving. The emperor rose, stunned as his 2 most trusted men, the taster and the physician, wrestled on the floor. As Qasim vomited violently, Luqman fought to retrieve his bag, desperate to keep its contents hidden. It was an appalling, chaotic scene of treachery and illness in the serene royal chamber. Then the final crucial link. A shadow detached itself from the doorway. Better. He moved with the quiet, shocking speed of a large beast, slamming into Luqman from behind. The Hakim cried out as Better twisted the medical bag free from his grip. "My duty is complete, Aga. Proof is secured." Better did not stop. He ran, disappearing into the labyrinth of the palace. His mission to deliver the proof to the military commander was now his sole focus. Luqman, seeing his evidence gone, saw his life flash before his eyes. He stopped fighting, raising his hands in a gesture of pathetic submission. "Qasim, weak, shaking and retching, forced himself to look at his emperor. "Your Majesty," he whispered, his voice ravaged, "the poison is in the cream, from Bijapur. The bag has the counteragent and the shock-e-jaun source. I risked my life to save yours. The physician, he is the vizier's weapon." Kamran, the vizier, had remained frozen, aghast at the collapse of his meticulous slow-motion plot. Now he saw better gone with the evidence. He looked at the vomiting taster whose loyalty had just destroyed decades of careful conspiracy. He bowed low to the emperor, his voice chillingly calm. "This loyal servant of yours has gone mad, your majesty. He must be confined." The emperor, Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah, a ruler who had survived court intrigue since birth, raised his hand. He looked down at the disgraced physician, the fleeing bodyguard, and the dying taster. He saw the genuine violent illness of Qasim contrasted with the icy composure of the physician and the vizier's immediate plea for confinement. "Seize the Hakim," the emperor commanded, his voice shaking with unexpected power. "Confine the vizier, and bring the taster, Mir Qasim, to the royal wing. His life is to be saved at all costs. He has tasted the poison of his own free will for the love of the throne. He is not a madman. He is a Shah Wali, a royal protector." As the guards moved in, Qasim felt the poison and the emetic battle in his gut. His vision blurred, and the tremor took over his entire body. He had found the traitor, saved his king, and secured the proof. His consciousness faded, leaving him with the bittersweet final taste of utter, painful loyalty. The king was safe, but the poisoner's life was now an open question.
The King's Poisoner, Season 2, Chapter 7, The Burden of the Cure. Mir Qasim did not die, but his recovery was a slow, agonizing testament to the insidious power of the shock-e-jaun. He awoke in the private royal wing, a sun-drenched chamber usually reserved for the emperor's immediate family. The air was thick with the aroma of medicinal incense and crushed herbs. His left side was a field of white-hot pain, his nerves still reeling from the poison, and his body was frail from the violent purge of the emetic. For 3 days, the greatest hakims of the empire worked on him, under the emperor's direct supervision. The poison was gone, neutralized by Qasim's own crude antidote and the rigorous cleansing treatments, but the damage remained. Qasim could no longer trust his own hand. The tremor persisted, a permanent, subtle shake that ruined the perfect stillness required of a royal taster. On the 4th morning, Emperor Jalaluddin himself came to Qasim's bedside, dismissing the physicians. The emperor was dressed in simple silks, his expression heavy with thought. "You saved my life, Qasim. Your loyalty is a legend that will be sung in the annals of the Mughal Empire." "It was my duty, your majesty," Qasim rasped, struggling to sit up. "Your duty has cost you your body's silence," the emperor noted, looking pointedly at Qasim's tremoring left hand. "The taster must have no doubt, no tremor, no ailment. Tell me, Qasim, can you still perform your duties?" Qasim knew the answer. The moment of truth required utter honesty. "No, your majesty. I can still detect the poison. My tongue is untouched, but I can no longer guarantee the flawless presentation. My hand is weak." The emperor nodded slowly. "Then your service as Shakobdar is concluded." The words, though expected, hit Qasim like a physical blow. His identity, his entire life's purpose was suddenly stripped away. "However," the emperor continued, a glint entering his eye, "your value to me has only increased. You know how men conspire. You know what they risk. And you know the Peshkhana and the bazaars better than my spy masters. You are my shield of observation now, Qasim. You are relieved of the kitchen, but your true work begins."
the emperor leaned closer. The vizier, Kamran, and the physician, Lakman, are now in the dungeons. They confessed everything. They acted to place Prince Daud on the throne. But we have a problem. Qasim frowned. The vizier's confession is not enough, Your Majesty. The evidence is strong, but the proof is incomplete, the emperor stated grimly. When we captured the Hakim, his medical bag was empty. Bada, your loyal second, vanished. He took the bag, the only physical proof, the written source of the Shok-e-Jan, and the secret antidotes, and disappeared. Badr would not betray you, sire. He must have gone to ground, awaiting my recovery. I want to believe that, Qasim, the emperor said. But the court whispers, the taster's man ran with the treasure. They say Badr has sold the secrets to the surviving conspirators to buy a new life. And Kamran's men are using Badr's disappearance to cast doubt on your own testimony. The emperor rose. I have confined Kamran, but I cannot execute him or imprison the prince without that evidence. It would split the army and the court. Qasim, I need you to find your man, and I need you to bring me that bag. The new assignment. Qasim's new task was simple and terrifying. Find his missing deputy, Badr, who is now officially branded a rogue thief and a traitor by the court. He would be operating in the shadows, using his illness as a cover story to move freely outside the palace. The emperor placed a heavy ring, the imperial seal, on Qasim's bedside. This grants you access to all my resources outside the fort. Find Badr. If he is a traitor, kill him and bring me the evidence. If he is still loyal, bring both of you back alive. This is not a duty of the court, Qasim. This is a debt of blood to me. Qasim took the ring, its weight reassuring in his steady right hand. He was no longer the taster, but an avenging agent, a shadow hunting a ghost. His mind raced, already formulating Badr's possible routes. Badr had fled toward the military barracks, where the Rajput general Raja Veer Singh, the same general Qasim had used to intimidate Rai Chand, held influence. Veer Singh was the only person with the power to protect a fugitive servant. The hunt for his closest friend was now Qasim's new poison.
The year is 1572. The city of Krakow, Poland, is a jewel of the Renaissance, but its light is fading under a shadow of fear. The air itself felt thick and sour, a low metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat, even to those who'd long ago lost the ability to smell the rot creeping out from the cramped Jewish quarter, where the sickness had first found purchase. Outside the quarter's gates, in the maze of narrow streets and half-timbered houses that made up the Christian district, life was a nervous pantomime. People walked quickly, heads down, their breath held tight in their chests, as if a single deep inhalation might draw the very blackness into their souls. Ilara knew the scent of sickness better than she knew the smell of her own lavender and thyme. At 22, she was already a master of the forbidden, a healer in a time when true knowledge of the human body was deemed heresy, a woman who treated patients the city's sanctioned, male-dominated surgeons and barber guild doctors had either abandoned or bled into an early grave. Her small stone cottage stood on the edge of the Kazimir district, close enough to the Jewish quarter for the sick to find her, but far enough from the main gates of the royal city to avoid the most vigilant eyes of the church patrols. Her clinic, if one could call the single sparse room with a dirt floor such a grand name, was currently empty, but the quiet was a lie. The whole village was a taut bowstring, waiting for the arrow of the plague to strike the bullseye. Ilara was grinding a batch of willow bark,
the dull scrape of the mortar and pestle a rhythmic counterpoint to the nervous silence outside. The herbs was an anchor, a deliberate anchor against the rising tide of panic. The door burst open, smashing against the rough-hewn wall with a violence that made Ilara jump, scattering a fine cloud of white willow dust into the morning light. It was Pyotr, the miller's son, his face slick with sweat and his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He was barely 16, a boy whose robust farm worker build now looked weak and shaky. "Ilara, you must come. It is my sister, Zofia. She's got the mark." Ilara's heart seized, a cold fist in her chest. The mark. Not the fever, not the cough, but the unmistakable tell. The darkened lymph nodes, the horrifying buboes that swelled in the armpit or groin, a black, hideous flag marking the body for death. It meant the sickness was no longer a shadow. It was a resident. She set down the pestle, wiping her hands on her rough linen apron. "Pyotr, breathe. You must breathe. Where is she?" "In the loft. My father barricaded the door with his own wagon. He fears the city men, the ones with the masks. They take them, Ilara. They take the sick and bury them, sometimes before the breath has even left them." Pyotr's voice cracked. Ilara grabbed her satchel, a worn leather bag containing her most vital tools and remedies. Freshly crushed garlic for cleansing, a tightly bound roll of clean linen bandages, and a small stoppered vial of the potent dark green poultice she guarded more closely than her own life. It was a formula taught to her by her grandmother, a secret melange of European herbs and a rare import from the distant East, a knowledge that could, perhaps, truly heal, but which the Church considered witchcraft. "Anyone else touch her?" Ilara asked, her voice low and firm, immediately shifting into the diagnostic rhythm that calmed her. "Only my mother once, to offer her water." "Then your mother must cleanse. Hot water, soap, and she must not touch her face, her eyes. Tell me the bubo. Where is it?" "Her neck, Ilara, right beneath her jawline, swollen like a pear." Pyotr winced, the memory of fresh cut. A bubo in the neck. That was bad. Closer to the brain, the heart. The prognosis for anyone with the swelling in the groin was dire. In the neck, it was a death sentence written in ink. The official city doctors offered prayer, then perhaps bloodletting, a final fatal stripping of the body's few remaining defenses. Ilara took Pyotr's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Lead me, and Pyotr, listen to me. No one else must know you came here. Not your neighbors, not the priest, and certainly not the city guard." "I understand," he whispered, his eyes meeting hers, a desperate shared secret passing between them. He had to understand. If word got out that she was treating the plague, and worse, if she failed, the city officials would burn her out, or worse, burn her entirely, for interfering with God's will and spreading contagion through sinful contact. They moved through the streets of Kazimir, each footfall on the uneven cobblestones a loud brazen challenge to the oppressive silence. The usual commerce had withered to a trickle. Doors were barred, windows shuttered. The scent of wood smoke and burning herbs mingled with the underlying stench of fear. Pyotr's farmstead house was a short, hurried walk away, tucked behind a cluster of brickmakers' yards. They reached the massive wooden gate. Pyotr hammered on it, his frantic rhythm a stark contrast to the deathly quiet. A narrow peephole slid open. Ilara saw the terrified eyes of the miller, Jan. "Pyotr, what have you done? Did you bring back the sickness with you?" Jan's voice was a harsh croak. "I brought Ilara, father, the healer. Let us in now." Jan hesitated, his fear a palpable barrier. He glanced at Ilara, at her simple, dark dress, her lack of any official physician's trappings, and her face, which was merely that of a young woman,
Not a scholar, just a woman. In his mind, she was already fighting a losing battle, and by letting her in, he invited the church's wrath.
Good. Stay here, Jan. Do not come near the ladder. Pyotr, bring me clean water heated, and a piece of clean cloth. Bring nothing else. She ascended the rickety wooden ladder to the loft, the air immediately growing heavier, hotter. The space was small, dark, and thick with the cloying odor of sweat and fever. Zofia, a girl of 14 whose vibrancy Ilara remembered from the last market day, lay on a straw mattress, her face pale, slick, and unnaturally flushed all at once. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and ragged. Ilara knelt beside her. She pulled back the neck of Zofia's simple shift. There it was. Beneath the delicate curve of her jaw, a dark, bulbous mound, the size of a pigeon's egg, taut and angrily purple-black against her pale skin. It pulsed with a terrible, slow heat. Yersinia pestis had found its home. Ilara took a deep, steadying breath, preparing the next phase of her dangerous work. She knew what needed to be done, a thing the proper doctors never dared. She needed to draw the poison out, not bleed the life force away. This task, and the ancient secret knowledge required to attempt it, would either save Zofia's life or cement Ilara's fate as a convicted witch and charlatan. Ilara opened her satchel. From a small, tightly wound coil of sheep gut, she pulled out the tools of her trade. Not the shining, intimidating steel of the city's surgeons, but a simple obsidian blade, cool and perfectly sharp, handed down through generations of healers. Beside it, she placed a clean piece of flannel and a small ceramic bowl. "Pyotr," she called down, her voice low but carrying, "the water, and hurry." The bucket appeared, hoisted up on a rope, followed by a neatly folded linen cloth. Ilara carefully poured some of the warm water into the ceramic bowl. She dipped the cloth and began to gently wipe Zofia's forehead, clearing the sweat. Zofia moaned, a sound of deep, guttural discomfort. Her eyes remained shut, the lids flickering. "Zofia, you must be brave for me," Ilara murmured, her voice a comforting balm of competence. "I am going to help you, but you must be still." She turned her attention to the bubo. The swelling was so hard it felt like a stone embedded under the skin. The official cure was to wait until it burst naturally, or to cut it open and let the foulness drain, a process that usually resulted in fatal sepsis for the patient. Ilara's method was different. It relied on drawing the poison out through a carefully prepared medium, limiting the body's exposure to the infected blood and pus. She took the small, stoppered vial from her satchel, the one containing the secret dark green paste. Its color was the deep, vital shade of forest moss. The ingredients were a mystery to all but her, a blend of mandrake root, poppy, and the aforementioned eastern spice, all meticulously ground and mixed with rendered fat. It was a potent sedative and a powerful counter-irritant, designed to concentrate the body's fight in one area. But before she could apply the poultice, she had to open the path. With the obsidian blade, a single, wickedly sharp artifact that seemed to drink the light, she made a series of shallow, precise incisions around the bubo's circumference. 4 tiny, barely bleeding cuts that did not pierce the infected node itself, but rather acted as channels. She was using a technique her grandmother called opening the gates, a way to guide the infection out, not to simply release it. Zofia gasped, but did not cry out. The pain was dull in her feverish state. Ilara worked quickly, her hands steady, her movements economical. She scooped a generous portion of the dark green poultice onto the flannel cloth, spreading it thickly, like a plaster. The paste smelled strongly of bitter earth and something faintly floral, a medicinal scent that immediately pushed back against the cloying fever smell of the loft. She placed the poultice directly over the bubo, pressing it firmly to ensure contact with the small incisions. The fabric quickly began to soak up the heat radiating from the swelling. "Pyotr," Ilara called softly, "go to your kitchen, find the strongest vinegar you have, a small jug, and bring me fresh charcoal, burned wood, not coal." She knew the request sounded strange, but the charcoal was a porous binder, an ancient tool for cleansing wounds, and the vinegar was her defense against the bad air, the miasma the common folk, and even many doctors still feared. When Pyotr returned, his breathing heavy from the effort of finding the requested items, Ilara instructed him to soak a separate piece of cloth in the vinegar. "Take this, Pyotr. You and your father and mother must keep this near your faces always, and you must not, under any circumstances, touch your sister or the mattress. I will stay with her now. You must leave this loft, and you must burn every piece of straw she has lain upon when the sun sets." Pyotr stared at her, his lips trembling. "You will stay?" To stay with a plague victim was to invite death. It was an act of profound, and to many, foolish bravery. The official city doctors wore their leather beak-nosed masks filled with herbs, attempting to keep the sickness away. Ilara wore only a clean linen scarf wrapped around her mouth and nose, relying on cleanliness and her own powerful internal resolve. "I will stay," Ilara confirmed. "Go, live, and pray." Pyotr scrambled back down the ladder. Ilara heard the heavy bolt slide back into place below, sealing the loft, and its dying occupant, and its determined healer, off from the world. She sat back on her heels, the only sound the shallow, desperate breaths of the girl and the distant, fearful cries of gulls over the Vistula River. The loft, now just Ilara and Zofia, felt less like a room, more like a tomb. She had done all she could for the moment. The paste was on, the gates were open. Now began the vigil, the terrifying, hours-long wait to see if the forbidden, esoteric knowledge of a mere woman was stronger than the wrath of God and the poison of the pestilence.
As the sun climbed higher, casting dusty yellow shafts through the small attic window, Sophia's fever began to climb. The bubo, stimulated by the poultice, grew hotter, a fiery knot beneath the green paste. Ilara knew the fever was a necessary battle, the body's attempt to cook the invader out, but too high, and it would claim her mind, and then her life. She reached for the bowl of willow bark dust, ready to mix a fever-reducing draught. That was when she heard the other sound, a heavy, rhythmic pounding from the main road, the sound of iron-shod boots marching in grim synchronization, the sound every family in Krakow now feared more than death itself. The city guard, and they were getting closer. The heavy, metallic drum of the approaching boots was punctuated by a sound Ilara dreaded even more, the high, nasal drone of the crier's bell, signaling an official proclamation. The noise stopped just outside the miller's yard. Ilara crept to the small, grimy window of the loft, pulling back a corner of the rough cloth draped over it. Below, in the empty, dust-choked street, stood a handful of city guards, clad in dented steel breastplates and carrying pikes. But it was the man in front who drew her gaze and sent a tremor of ice through her. He was a man of the church, but not a simple priest. This was Inquisitor Father Marek, a man known throughout Krakow for his merciless zeal and his relentless pursuit of heresy, a word that, in this frightened time, included any medical practice that did not conform to the accepted wisdom of Galen and, more importantly, the approved pronouncements of the ecclesiastical authorities. Marek was tall, gaunt, and carried himself with the rigid, self-righteous posture of one who saw the devil's work in every shadow.
His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to bore into the very stone of the miller's gate. Beside him stood the crier, ringing his bell with slow, deliberate tolling. "Hear ye, hear ye," the crier shouted, his voice echoing in the deserted street. "By order of the royal magistrate and the church council of Krakow, all homes harboring the pestilence are hereby declared sealed. Any citizen found to be afflicted with the bubonic swellings must be reported immediately." Inquisitor Marek stepped forward, his voice a cold whip that cracked across the silence. "The sickness is God's judgment. It is a purging of the sinful soul, and it shall not be interfered with by witchcraft or profane hands. Any who offer false remedies, any who attempt to subvert the will of the Almighty with herbs and incantations shall be apprehended. Such acts are treason against heaven and state. The punishment shall be the pyre." Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Marek's proclamation was a direct challenge to her very existence. It was not just a warning, it was a legal declaration that her work was a capital crime. Below, she heard Jan, the miller, stir, his fear twisting into a terrible, reckless anger. "Father Marek," Jan shouted through the closed gate, "my daughter, Zofia, she is sick, but she is a good Christian girl. This is not sin, this is a blight." Marek's gaunt face turned toward the gate. He smiled, a thin, cruel curve of the lips. "Ah, Jan, I knew the pestilence had come to your roof. You have done well to report it. But heed my words. The physician is coming, the official representative of the guild, to prepare her soul and her body for the cleansing. Stand aside." Elara knew an official physician would mean bloodletting and pointless, painful purgatives, a guaranteed death for Zofia. It also meant a witness, someone who would see the evidence of her forbidden practice, the small, intentional cuts, the dark, highly unusual poultice. If they found her here, she wouldn't just be a healer, she'd be a witch caught red-handed. She glanced down at Zofia. The poultice was working, but slowly. The area around the bubo was reddening, a hopeful sign that the blood flow was being drawn to the surface, but the girl's fever was spiking, her shallow breathing coming in painful gasps. The obsidian blade, the poultice, she had to hide the evidence. "Jan, do not let them in yet," Elara hissed through the window. Below, the sounds of a scuffle started. The heavy iron bar securing the main gate began to rattle under the force of the guards. "Halt! It is unlawful to deny the physician entry!" Elara knew she had only moments. She moved with desperate speed. She snatched the flannel cloth with the dark poultice from Zofia's neck and wiped the area clean with the vinegared linen, erasing any trace of her methods. She then quickly swallowed the poultice, the bitter, medicinal taste momentarily searing her tongue. The ingredients were harmless, powerful, but not a true poison. She wrapped the used flannel and the obsidian blade in a piece of linen and slipped the package deep into a crack in the loth stone hearth, covering it with a handful of loose straw. Zofia was now thrashing slightly, her eyes still closed, muttering inconscious words. Her fever was a roaring inferno. Elara had to get out, not to save herself, but to be able to return. If she was caught here, all the villagers who needed her, the mothers, the children, the abandoned sick, would lose their only hope. Her knowledge, her life, was worth more outside the barricaded walls than on a pyre. She looked to the far side of the loft. There was another small, high window facing the rear, toward the empty brickmaker's yard. It was small, but perhaps manageable. She threw open the shutters and peered out. Below,
About 10 feet down was a pile of soft, discarded sawdust and shavings from Jan's milling. A desperate jump, but a possible escape. Below, the gate buckled. A final resounding crash indicated the outer bolt had given way. "Search the house, find the infection, and seal it," Marek commanded. Ilara climbed onto the sill. The air outside was cool and clean against her feverish face. She took one final, long look at Sophia, whose fate now rested on the brief, secret work she had done and the small willow bark draft she'd placed on a stool beside the girl's head. "Survive this, little sparrow," Ilara whispered. She pushed off the sill, dropping out of the light and into the darkness below. She landed hard. The air knocked from her lungs, but the sawdust cushioned her fall. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp, tearing pain in her ankle. She had to get out of the yard, fast. She ran, hunched over, towards the boundary wall, even as she heard the heavy feet of the city guard begin to pound up the rickety ladder to the loft she had just vacated. Ilara scrambled over the low stone wall separating the miller's farm from the adjoining brickyard, ignoring the agonizing stab of pain from her ankle. She landed on a bed of cold, damp clay, the air tasting of earth and mildew. She could hear shouting from the miller's loft, the confused, angry cries of the city guard. They had found the sick girl, but not the healer. She pressed herself against a stack of discarded clay bricks, trying to regulate her ragged breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic trapped gird. She had escaped the trap, but she was now a fugitive. "She's gone! The heretic is gone!" Marek's voice, amplified by his fury, carried clearly across the yard. "Search the perimeter. She has the sickness on her hands. Find her before she spreads her poison through the entire city." Ilara knew the terror of the plague was Marek's strongest ally. The people of Krakow were more afraid of contagion than they were of the Inquisitor, and they would turn her in for a few coins and a promise of health. She pushed herself up and began to hobble, favoring her uninjured leg, moving through the labyrinth of the brickyard. She needed to reach the river, the Vistula, where the docks and market lay. The crowding and chaos of the marketplace, for all its danger, offered the best cover. As she rounded a kiln, she saw a flicker of movement. A tall figure stood blocking the narrow passage to the main street, a man with a heavy woolen cloak pulled high around his face. She froze. Was it another guard? The man stepped into the light filtering between the stacks of brick. He wasn't a guard. He was older, with a lean, weathered face and sharp, intelligent eyes that were currently fixed on her injured ankle. He wore the modest but distinctly well-made clothes of a master craftsman or a merchant. "You look as if the hounds of hell are at your heels, girl," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He spoke Polish with a subtle aristocratic accent Ilara didn't recognize. "And you stand in my path," Ilara retorted, her hand instinctively clutching the empty pocket where her knife would usually rest. He gave a small, humorless chuckle. "I saw them break down the miller's gate, and I saw you fall. That is an ankle, not a life-ending injury, but it will slow you enough for Marek's dogs to catch the scent." He paused, studying her face. "You were tending the sick, weren't you, with something other than prayer and leeches?" Ilara held his gaze, refusing to confirm or deny. Her reputation, even her forbidden reputation, must have spread further than she thought. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, suspicion heavy in her voice. "I am not helping you. I am merely watching the entertainment. But I have a brief interest in seeing the city guard frustrated. Besides, I despise Marek's brand of piety. He uses the sickness as a club, not a cross." He looked back toward the miller's yard. The sound of shouting was getting closer. "Your choice, healer. Go that way
He pointed to a wide-open avenue that led directly into the city square. "And they'll have you before you take 5 good strides. Or come with me." He gestured to a barely visible, narrow opening in the high perimeter fence, a secret gate hidden by a tangle of wild ivy. Desperation overruled caution. "Show me." He turned and slipped through the hidden gate with practiced ease. Ilara hesitated only a moment, then followed. She dragged her body through the opening, tearing her dress and scraping her skin, and found herself on a secluded, narrow path that ran parallel to the main thoroughfare, hidden by a line of thick, overgrown hawthorn trees. "This is an old shepherd's trail," he explained without looking back, walking at a brisk, unrelenting pace. "It leads down to the quieter fishing docks, away from the main merchant's gate." Ilara stumbled, pain shooting up her leg. "I can't keep this pace." The man stopped abruptly and looked back. "Then you will die on the pyre. Is that the fate you seek after fighting the disease itself?" He didn't wait for an answer. He knelt quickly beside her, his fingers probing her ankle with the practiced, firm pressure of someone who understood pain. "No breaks, a severe twist. You are lucky," he pronounced. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, leather pouch. Inside were dried, crushed leaves. He chewed a few quickly, his face expressionless, then pressed the softened pulp directly onto her swollen ankle. The effect was almost immediate, a dull, soothing coolness that numbed the sharpest edge of the agony. "White poppy and comfrey, good for the pain, better for the bone." Then he tightly wrapped the ankle in a strip of linen he tore from his own cloak lining. "It will hold you for a time. Now walk, and think on this. Marek will not stop searching for the witch who escaped him. You cannot stay in the city." They continued their hurried, whispered flight. The path was uneven, but the man's improvised bandage held. They soon heard the lapping water of the Vistula. "I need to get back to my cottage," Ilara insisted, her mind already moving past escape to the next challenge, her supplies, her sanctuary. "My remedies." "Your cottage is the first place they will search once they realize you're gone," he interrupted sharply, leading her down to a muddy bank where a single, small rowing boat was moored. "The docks are sealed at the main gate. This is your only exit." He offered her a hand into the boat. Ilara looked at the river, dark, cold, and flowing away from the safety of her life. "Who are you?" she asked one last time, pulling her hand away to look him fully in the face. The man stepped into the boat, his hand resting on the single, worn paddle. He looked back at the smoke-hazed skyline of Krakow, a city caught between its grandeur and its panic.
"My name is Casimir," he said, "and I am merely a student of things that thrive in the shadows. The plague is a profitable venture for men like Marek. True healing, therefore, is a threat to their commerce. You cannot fight them inside their walls, Ilara. You must leave. The river is your route to safety, and perhaps to a new beginning." He pushed the boat off the muddy bank. The sound of Marek's furious shouts was suddenly faint, muffled by the distance and the flowing water. Ilara sat down, her wounded ankle throbbing, and watched her home, the great, frightened city of Krakow, shrink behind her. She had saved Sophia's life, for now, but she had lost her own. The river Vistula, usually a bustling artery of trade, was now an escape route shrouded in mist and fear. The early morning light filtered through the low-hanging fog, giving the scene a spectral quality. Ilara sat hunched in the small boat, her wounded ankle propped on the wooden thwart, the throbbing pain a constant, grim reminder of her abrupt flight. The receding towers of Krakow, once a symbol of civilization and refuge, were now just a dangerous silhouette against the bruised sky. Casimir, her cryptic savior, rowed with a quiet, tireless efficiency. His gaze was fixed on the distant river bends, never lingering on Ilara or the city they left behind. He was a man of the river, blending with the fog and the water, a person who clearly preferred to be invisible. "You have my thanks, Casimir," Ilara finally said, her voice hoarse from the dust and the fear. He didn't stop rowing. "Save your thanks, Ilara. It was a simple act of commerce. I traded a moment of my time for a small victory over the Inquisitor. Your life is your currency now. Do not spend it cheaply." "You speak of Marek as if he were a personal rival," Ilara pressed. Casimir's response was a low grunt. "Every man of reason is a rival to a fanatic, but Marek is worse. He is a scavenger. He feeds on the panic of the plague. He uses fear to strengthen his church, to burn books and suppress knowledge he doesn't comprehend. He is the true plague on this land." Ilara looked down at her hands. The fine, pale dust of willow bark and the bitter scent of the green poultice still clung to her skin. The forbidden knowledge, the witchcraft Marek spoke of, was her only asset and her most dangerous liability. "Where are we going? The lower villages are sealed off, and the trade routes will be watched." "We are going downriver, toward the Carpathian foothills. There is an old abandoned mill on a tributary near the town of Ternov. It's remote. The plague rarely reaches there with its full force, and the authorities rarely bother to venture so far from the city's coffers. It will be a place of quiet for a time." A flicker of hope mixed with dread in Ilara's mind. A remote place meant safety from Marek, but it also meant isolation. Her work was in the crowded villages where the sickness took its biggest toll. Her purpose was with the masses. "I cannot stay there long. The people in the city, the families I cared for, they still need me." Casimir finally stopped rowing, letting the boat drift in the quiet current. He turned, his gaze penetrating, assessing her resolve. "You cannot heal the dead, Ilara, and you cannot heal from a pyre," he said, his voice flat and absolute. "Your skill is rare. If it is to survive, you must first ensure you survive. Hide, gather new knowledge. The sickness will spread. It always does. Wait for it to come to you, where you can be both effective and invisible." He pushed off again, the boat slipping deeper into the mists. Ilara knew he was right. Her grandmother had always taught her that the most powerful medicine was useless if the healer was compromised. She needed supplies, security, and time to prepare for the inevitable. As they traveled, the riverbanks began to change. The bustling piers and the heavy stone foundations of Krakow gave way to fields of stubble and low wooded banks. They saw no other boats, only the occasional glimpse of a figure on the shore, a lone peasant, bundled against the chill, watching them with suspicion. Everyone was a threat now. They rode all day, sharing only a piece of hard, dry bread and some goat cheese Casimir had tucked away. He was economical with everything, including words. Late in the afternoon, Casimir pointed toward a narrow, almost hidden stream that broke away from the main river. "There, the Serna Creek. The mill is a mile up that bank." The creek was choked with willow and sedge. Casimir moored the boat and pulled a bundle wrapped in oilcloth from under the stern. It contained a small axe, a piece of flint, and a modest sack of dried grains. "This is where my help ends," he stated simply, handing her the sack. "I am returning upriver. I have a cargo to collect and a life to continue. Your path is here." Ilara accepted the sack and the oilcloth bundle. Her resources, her very existence, now depended on this stranger's charity. "Will I see you again, Casimir?" she asked, a strange ache of solitude already forming in her chest. He paused, adjusting his cloak, his eyes focused on something unseen on the horizon. The world of those who live in the shadows is small, healer. If your work continues, and Marek's fire does not claim you, our paths may cross again. But do not seek me out. I do not stay in one place long. With a final brief nod, he stepped back into the boat and pushed off into the current of the Vistula, leaving Ilara alone on the muddy bank of the Cerna Creek. He was gone as quickly and silently as he had arrived. A dark, necessary current that had carried her out of the storm. Ilara turned her attention to the creek bank, her injured ankle protesting with every step. She hobbled along the narrow trail until the trees opened up to reveal the mill. It was a desolate sight. The great wooden water wheel was broken, half submerged in the sluggish creek. The stone structure was sound, but the windows were dark, gaping holes, and the air was thick with the scent of stagnant water and decay. It was not a home, but a refuge of last resort. She pushed open the heavy waterlogged door. The grinding floor inside was covered in years of dust and cobwebs. Her eyes scanned the space, seeking the necessities: a clean patch of floor, a source of water, and most crucially, a secure place to rebuild her life and her precious arsenal of herbs and tinctures. She pulled out the book, its worn cover cool against her palms. Inside were pages filled with Latin, Polish, and the ancient, secret symbols of the herbalists, recipes for antiseptics made from river reeds, directions for calming spasms with the seeds of the wild lettuce, and the single, terrifyingly effective antidote to the initial stages of the plague.
Ilara knew that Sophia's survival depended on the few hours of work she'd done. But to survive here, she needed to work, to create, to find the plants that would become her shields. She needed to start planting her seeds of defiance. She took the small axe and walked out into the overgrown yard. The mill was cold, empty, and silent. But outside the stone walls, the vast, unforgiving Polish wilderness offered its own dark medicine. She had the knowledge, and now she had the freedom to use it without fear of immediate discovery. Her exile had begun. The mill was silent, yet every creak of the ancient timbers seemed to Ilara like a shout in the wilderness. Her first few days were a blur of pain, hunger, and relentless work. The sprained ankle was a constant, throbbing burden, but she used the injury as a lash, driving herself forward. She could not afford weakness. Her immediate necessity was the transformation of the mill from a decaying tomb into a fortress of healing. The upper room, the old office, became her sanctum. She sealed the broken windows with salvaged planks and mud, leaving only the small high pane for light and air. The stone hearth offered protection, and she began a routine of burning cleansing herbs, rosemary and bay, to clear the stagnant air, replacing the stench of mildew with sharp, vital scents. Her most urgent need was to replenish her stores. The sack of grain Casimir left was meager, but the surrounding Carpathian foothills were a treasure trove to a skilled herbalist. Despite her throbbing ankle, Ilara spent her daylight hours exploring the creek banks and the damp, shaded woods nearby. She found the familiar spiky leaves of horehound, crucial for brewing a bitter tonic to clear the lungs and settle the stomach. She gathered vast bundles of yarrow, recognizing its feathery heads as a powerful styptic to staunch bleeding, an inevitable necessity if the plague boo-boys needed lancing. Most critically, she located a patch of meadowsweet, whose delicate almond-scented flowers and leaves contained the salicylic acid that would become her most reliable fever reducer, a safe replacement for the precious willow bark she had run out of. This foraging was exhausting.
Every movement was a strategic calculation against the pain. She was alone, isolated, and utterly dependent on her own strength and knowledge. The Book of Shadows was her only companion, its pages often spread on the mill floor while she crushed roots and dried leaves, following the hand-drawn instructions of her forebearers. One damp afternoon, while digging for the gnarled root of a particularly potent vervain, she heard a distant sound, not the wind, but a rhythmic clanking that signaled the presence of iron, and thus man. Ilara froze, her heart leaping back to the fear of Marek and his guards. She dropped the spade and retreated into the thicket of hawthorn. She watched and waited. The sound grew louder, culminating in the appearance of a cart being pulled by a single, skinny mule. The cart was laden with clay pots and wooden crates, and driving it was a figure wrapped in layers of rough, dark wool. A potter, by the look of it, heading toward the main road to Tarnov. The potter was an old man, his face a road map of hard lines and worry. As he passed, he glanced fearfully at the broken mill, his eyes lingering on the chimney, where a thin wisp of smoke now rose. The sight of the man was a jolt. He was clearly trying to pass the mill quickly, avoiding it, but his weariness and the state of his mule betrayed his need for rest. Ilara watched him stop 100 yards down the path, where he cautiously led the mule to the creek for water. She needed contact. She needed to know what was happening in the world she had fled. Tucking the vervain root into her apron pocket, Ilara hobbled out of the woods, her hands held open and empty, a gesture of peace. "Good day, Master Potter," she called, keeping her voice light and even. The old man startled, nearly dropping the mule's lead. He turned, fear clouding his eyes as he took in her appearance. The dirt-stained clothes, the thick, homemade bandage on her ankle, and the unmistakable air of someone living rough. "Who are you? What are you doing at the mill?" he stammered, pulling the mule closer to him, as if the animal could offer protection. "That place is cursed." "My name is Ilara. I am merely sheltering for a time. The mill needs an overseer," she lied smoothly, invoking a common excuse for squatting on abandoned land. "I meant no harm, but I see you are traveling hard. Do you come from the city, Krakow?" The potter squinted at her, his fear slowly giving way to weary curiosity. "No one comes from Krakow these days. I come from a small village west of Tarnov. I'm taking my goods to the market there before the gate seals entirely." I spit on the ground. "The news travels faster than the sickness, and it is all bad." Ilara lowered herself gingerly on a smooth creek stone. "Tell me the news. We are isolated here." The potter hesitated, then decided the fear of the plague was less than the comfort of human conversation. He sat down heavily on an overturned bucket. "The plague has not left Krakow, no. It has settled," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The deaths are too numerous for the city pits now. They are burning bodies in the squares, and the inquisitor, Marek, he has gained more power than the magistrate himself. He blames the illness on heretics and foreigners, and anyone who uses natural remedies." Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He is searching for anyone who defies him." "Searching? No, he is hunting," the potter corrected grimly. "They closed the Jewish quarter entirely, and they are arresting anyone found with suspicious herbs. They burned the shop of a poor apothecary last week, claiming he was poisoning the people with infusions. Anyone who knows more than the priest is now marked." He looked straight at Ilara's muddy apron. "And the word of the healer of Casimir has spread, the woman who escaped the miller's farm. Marek offers a large reward for her capture. He says she is infected and spreads the sickness with her touch." Ilara met his gaze, holding it steady. She was looking into the eyes of a man who held her life in his hands. "I am just a woman, Master Potter," Ilara said simply, her hand tightening around the hidden root in her pocket. "But the man you speak of, Marek, he sounds like a true monster. Do you have a family in Tarnov?" The potter's eyes softened with unexpected tears. "A wife and 2 small sons. I pray the illness does not reach them before I can sell these pots and buy a store of flour." Ilara recognized the pure, desperate fear of a father, a fear that could make him turn her in for the reward or make him complicit in her survival. She reached into her apron and pulled out the smooth, dark vervain root. She split it cleanly with her fingernail, revealing the white flesh inside. "I may not be the healer Marek seeks, but I am not without knowledge, Master Potter. Take this root. Boil it in water until the liquid is dark. Let your wife and sons drink it every morning. It will not ward off the plague, but it will strengthen their bodies against common fever and stomach sickness. It is a gift, with no cost." The potter stared at the root, then at her face. He saw not the notorious witch of Krakow, but a woman who offered a small, tangible hope in a hopeless time. He saw the genuine, unasked-for kindness. He nodded slowly, taking the root. "May God repay your generosity, Ilara." He paused, then leaned forward, his voice a barely audible rasp. "If you must travel, stick to the old Roman roads through the forest. They are hidden by the canopy and avoided by the official patrols. And do not, for the love of Christ, go toward Tarnov. The gates are almost closed. Go further east toward the mountains. There are ancient people there, mountain folk. They are wary, but they trust the old ways, and they despise city priests."
He stood up, pulling his mule's lead. "I have a long journey. May you find your peace, Ilara." He did not look back. Ilara watched him go, the heavy clanking of his cart fading into the wilderness. She had survived her first contact with the outside world. She had acquired a piece of vital intelligence. Marek was hunting her, specifically, and she had secured the trust of a stranger with a simple root. Her ankle still ached, but the isolation was broken. She now knew the direction of her next move, east, toward the mountains and the promise of a deeper, older knowledge that lay beyond the reach of the Inquisition. Chapter 4. The Old Roman Road. The necessity of movement overruled the pain in her ankle. The encounter with the potter had clarified her danger. She was not just fleeing the plague, but a focused official hunt led by Inquisitor Marek. The mill was compromised. She needed to disappear entirely, to become a ghost on the land. The next morning, before the mist had fully lifted, Ilara abandoned the relative safety of the mill. She strapped her swollen ankle tightly with thick strips of linen, creating a rigid support that allowed her to bear weight, though with a persistent grinding ache. Her possessions were few: the Book of Shadows, wrapped securely in oilcloth, a meager pouch of the strongest herbs, and the small axe. She followed the potter's advice, seeking the forgotten path, the old Roman road that cut through the ancient forests toward the east. These roads, remnants of an empire centuries gone, were avoided by modern traffic, too overgrown and hidden by the encroaching wilderness for the heavy wagons and official patrols of Krakow. The road was a welcome shield. The dense canopy of ancient oaks and pines swallowed the light and muffled all sound. Here, the air was clean, smelling of damp earth and resin, a stark contrast to the sour, fever-ridden stench of the city. Ilara walked in the shadows, her eyes constantly scanning the forest, not just for danger, but for the silent pharmacies of the undergrowth. Her journey became a relentless, solitary lesson in survival. She learned to identify the small medicinal spring where the water ran clean and clear, and to recognize the sound of a distant stream that could harbor edible cress.
She gathered handfuls of nettles for their vitamins and wild garlic to chew. The sharp pungency of the bulb, her own personal internal fumigation against the lingering fear of contagion. 3 days into her trek, she reached a point where the Roman road passed through a low marshy area. The ground was treacherous, sucking at her worn leather boots. It was here, amidst the tangled roots and standing water, that she made a crucial, dangerous discovery. Lying slumped against the base of a huge gnarled birch tree was a man. He was a merchant by the look of his once fine but now muddy wool tunic. He was clearly past the ability to stand, his face slick with sweat, his breathing shallow and rapid. Ilara's heart sank, not in fear of him, but in recognition of his affliction. The undeniable signs were there. A terrible pallor, the glassy, unfocused stare, and worst of all, the barely visible but aggressive swelling beneath his left armpit. A bubo was forming. He was in the agonizing initial throes of the black pestilence. Ilara's instinct was to flee. She had limited supplies, an injured leg, and a burning need to remain hidden. To stop here was to risk everything, her life, her freedom, and the survival of the knowledge she carried. Yet she was a healer. She could not leave him to suffer the slow, burning consumption of the disease alone. She dropped her pack and immediately set to work. She dragged the man further from the damp ground, propping him up against the drier side of the birch. She found his water flask and forced a few drops between his cracked lips. "Can you hear me?" she murmured, checking the heat radiating off his skin. The man groaned, his eyes flickering open. "Water! Mercy! I can offer more than water, but you must be still. I am a healer. I will help you, but you must do exactly as I say." She retrieved her axe and quickly fashioned a small wooden bowl from a piece of fallen bark. She built the smallest possible fire, shielding the tiny flame with her body and a cluster of rocks, heating the water in his metal flask. From her meager supply, she took her most potent anti-fever remedy, dried powdered meadowsweet. She stirred the powder into the hot water, creating a sweet, almost intoxicating brew. "Drink this," she ordered, holding the flask to his lips. "It will calm the fire inside you." He swallowed the bittersweet liquid, his tremors slowly easing. The next terrifying phase of her work began. She unwrapped the bubo beneath his armpit. It was dark, angry, and hot. She knew the poison must be drawn out, but the risk of cutting him with her obsidian blade in this exposed location, with her own hands shaking from exhaustion, was immense. The blade was still hidden near the miller's cottage, its removal too dangerous to attempt. Ilara had to improvise. She remembered an obscure remedy from her grandmother's book, a desperate measure for when tools failed, the use of earth and fire. She quickly dug a patch of clean, dry clay from the root of the birch. She mixed it with a strong decoction of plantain leaves, the common soldier's herb, known for drawing out infection, and a tiny pinch of the precious willow ash left from her last fire. She formed the mixture into a thick, cool poultice.